Hi, everyone, and welcome to From Blind Obedience to Normative Freedom at the New Center for Research and Practice, taught by J.P. Caron. This is a 2-credit seminar. Wittgenstein remains an enigmatic figure for contemporary philosophy. For some, a radical debunker of its pretensions towards totality and closure. For others, a conservative caretaker of what is as it is. This opposition is not the only one to be motivated by the unusual pathways taken by his thinking. A different juncture presents itself between the constructive Wittgensteinians, those who uphold that Wittgenstein's philosophy does present positive theses and ways forward for traditional philosophizing, and the quietist proponents of the so-called resolute reading, wherein Wittgenstein is seen as a purely therapeutic philosopher, unmaking philosophical theses by a patient working through of their linguistic expression. Interestingly, one can find the previous opposition reconciled in the quietist reading instead of the image of a radical debunker. The conservative aspect stems from the deactivation of the philosophical drive towards acceptance of given forms of life. While having its scholarly merits, the quietist does not necessarily have the final word, and the amount of systematic philosophy being pursued under Wittgenstein's influence attests to the Prothean resonances of this thinker. Mostly against this quietist reading, a Wittgensteinian thread runs deep within the inferentialist line of thought, particularly the uncanny connection between this thread and a form of Hegelianism that currently shines in contemporary analytic philosophy. Meredith Williams' Blind Obedience tries to carve a middle ground between the quietist and the constructive Wittgensteinian by offering a fine-grained analysis of the shapes and objects of Wittgenstein's arguments in philosophical investigations. And by doing so, Williams revisits a large swath of 20th century philosophy of language in the process, offering illuminating comparisons with the likes of Quine, Davidson, Sellers, Brandom, McDowell, among others. This 2-credit seminar will tackle Williams' reading of the philosophical investigations with an eye on the different models of semantic holism that are displayed in her book. By doing this, we hope to unearth the differences between diverse kinds of webs of belief, space of reasons, holistic models of language, with different consequences to the concept of forms of life and their relations. This suggests the Wittgensteinian pragmatic challenge to analysis, random, as a possible site for the construction of an interface assembling different strands of contemporary philosophical thought. In doing this, we try to deepen the constructive vector that can be yielded out of Wittgenstein's therapeutics, thus welding, debunking, and constructing in one and the same dialectical tool. Each session in this 8-session seminar will focus on one of the 8 chapters of Williams' book, adding the relevant sections of Wittgensteinian's philosophical investigations and the interlocutors that are mentioned within the chapters. The seminar continues an ongoing investigation on the logical concept of the form of life and its theoretical and practical consequences, but it can be followed independently of my previous seminars for the New Center, or your previous seminars for the New Center for Research and Practice. J.P. Caron is a philosopher and artist based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. His doctoral research developed at both the University of Paris, I'm going to mess this up, Vincennes Saint-Denis, and the University of Sao Paulo, proposed a critique of the aesthetic philosophy of John Cage in the context of contemporary ontology of art and philosophy of language. He is a lecturer in philosophy at the UFRJ, Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro, and he militates in the Circle of Studies of the Idea and Ideology, CSII, an international political collective dedicated to examining the viability of the communist hypotheses today. He's been practicing noise and experimental music for more than 15 years, and several of his records have been released, many through his own imprint. seminal records. Recently, he's been working on the problem of generic organization as it appears in different fields, like art, science, and politics, and its relationship to scale sensitivity. Right. JP, you can take it away.
Thank you, Nicholas. I should definitely redo my bio because some of that stuff is not up to date. For instance, the circle has been disbanded in last year, so anyway, that does not exist anymore. So we are now the subset of theoretical practice. So anyway, this changed. But anyway, that's not that important. I wanted to ask you, are we still doing presentations like individual presentations the first day, like everybody has to say their names and their research? Is this still a ritual that's going on in the new center?
So it's not the most necessary ritual. I think it's been a bit the thing that we try to do is when people are engaging, especially in this first course, when they're watching the video, is that they'll try to do the introductions towards the end, because if we do them in the beginning, then it becomes kind of a maybe somewhat of a deep.
Okay, I see. Just because, yeah, I see for the YouTube viewers and stuff. Okay, fine.
Yeah, maybe we can save it for the last.
Yeah, let's save it for the last 10 minutes or so. Okay, fine. That's good. Anyway, most of the people here I know already. So anyway. So welcome. First 2-credit seminar that I give at the new center. A bit less suffering, I hope, because as most people know, many of my seminars, 1-credit seminars, ended up having too much material to be covered and ended up being too dense in a certain sense. So, but this one is 2-credit, but ironically, it's just, I mean, one book or a couple of books, namely Philosophical Investigations and Meredith Williams' treatment of it. And of course, a bunch of collateral texts that are mentioned in her treatments. So this, I think, it's pretty interesting. Was pretty interesting to me to try to offer a seminar about this book, because it almost amounts to a kind of crash course in a certain area of 20th century analytical philosophy. So it's not just Wittgenstein. I mean, Wittgenstein will be, of course, the core of the seminar, but we'll be reaching out to a lot of different thinkers, as the ones that were mentioned in the summary, in the abstract, right? Quine and Davidson, McDowell, Brandon, Sellers, you name it. So I'll just, I have here, as always, a PowerPoint presentation for you. I'll start to share it. So is this a PowerPoint? Yeah, this is the PowerPoint. No, I prefer the PDF version. Just a second. Share screen, where's the PDF version? Yeah, this one's better. Okay. So from blind obedience to normative freedom, session 1. I always start with the course summary, but Nicholas already read this for you. So this is just the introduction to the seminar. I'm just pointing out that basically we'll be reading this back-to-back Meredith Williams' treatment of philosophical investigations and the corresponding paragraphs themselves, and also some of the collateral authors or the other authors that she uses to compare to Wittgenstein in her book. And there's a bunch of them which are very important in 20th century analytic philosophy. So this is basically it. So as the abstract was mentioning, I think, and this is the first 2 paragraphs of her book. The basic duality that is being kind of the framework wherein she's trying to find herself, to navigate, is this difference between a resolute and an orthodox reading of Wittgenstein, right? What I want to do today is to just give her introduction, her first chapter actually, which was the reading for today, right? And I will try to contextualize the difference between the resolute and the orthodox reading, not only in the philosophical investigations, but very briefly in the Tractatus, because the origin of the resolute reading lies in the Tractatus, not in the philosophical investigations, right? I mean, I'm kind of taking it that you know Wittgenstein has like two basic and core bodies of work that are represented in these two books, the Tractatus that was published in 1922 and the posthumous philosophical investigations, but there's a whole bunch of different materials that we can use and draw from. At least I think I'll be using at least one third source here in this seminar, which is the uncertainty, which is the post Wittgenstein, like the last thing that Wittgenstein wrote. So just to get clear on that. So anyway, usually, basically, Williams's book is about philosophical investigation then, but I'll try to contextualize this difference between the resolute and the orthodox reading in the Tractatus, right? So just a little bit about the Tractatus. We'll be dealing more thoroughly with the Tractatus in the 4th session of this seminar, okay? A little bit more. But this is just to understand from where does that difference come from, the resolute and the orthodox reading. And the resolute and the orthodox reading, this different, codifies kind of two different attitudes towards Wittgenstein. So whenever somebody listens, hears Wittgenstein's name, a bunch of different associations, right, come up. One of them is like the idea that he's an anti-philosopher, or he's a quietist philosopher, or he's trying to get out of philosophy or criticize philosophy as a whole, right? So the orthodox and the resolute reading are two different attitudes towards this particular thread in Wittgenstein's work, right? These ideas, this kind of what Badiou would call anti-philosophical ideas within Wittgenstein's thought, okay? So here's the first two paragraphs of Williams. One of the fundamental debates over how to understand Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations concerns whether he is developing theories of language and mind that are alternatives to traditional theories. His explicit meta-philosophical remarks state otherwise. And here she's referring to the meta-philosophical remarks in the philosophical investigations. I find it kind of weird that she does not mention that the difference between the irresolute and the orthodox reading actually stems from readings of the Tractatus and not readings from the philosophical investigations. But anyway, this is why I'm trying to give a foundation for this difference here today that is a little bit different from what Meredith Williams is doing in her chapter, okay? Famously, Wittgenstein insists that he offers no theories, provides no explanations of the phenomena with which philosophers have been preoccupied. Still less can philosophy reform language. Rather, philosophy may in no way interfere with the actual use of language. It can, in the end, only describe it. Yet much in Wittgenstein's later writings can plausibly be taken to offer an alternative conception of language and mind. So, on the one hand, we find constructive interpretations that can only downplay the significance of the meta-philosophical remarks. And on the other hand, we find the new Wittgenstein of the resolute reader who privileges the meta-philosophical remarks. So here you have kind of this paradox. Both readings end up in a kind of paradox, because if you want to valorize the positive philosophical inflection that Wittgenstein is giving philosophy, you would have to downplay the significance of the meta-philosophy. If you want to think of Wittgenstein as engaging in a new form of activity that is not really, maybe is not even really philosophy, and you are therefore valorizing the meta-philosophical remarks, you have to downplay all the theoretical tools that he uses in order to arrive at these meta-philosophical remarks in some sense, because there's a kind of mutual relationship of reinforcement between what he says, we would say theoretically or philosophically, and what he says meta-philosophically in terms of trying to get out of what he thinks is a certain kind of philosophy. Okay. So this is the basic stage, right? So historically, the origin of this difference between the resolute reading and the orthodox reading is the Tractatus. This is from the introduction to the Tractatus by Wittgenstein himself. There's a preface, right? And there's a Bertrand Russell introduction that was published and usually is published with the book, right? It was published in the first edition as well. But this is Wittgenstein himself. He says, the book deals with the problems of philosophy and shows, I believe, that the reason why these problems are posed is that the logic of our language is misunderstood. The whole sense of the book might be summed up in the following words. What can be said at all can be said clearly, and what we cannot talk about, we must pass over in silence. Thus, the aim of the book is to draw a limit to thought, or rather, not to thought, but to the expression of thoughts. For in order to be able to draw limits to thought, we should have to find both sides of the limit thinkable, i.e., we should have to be able to think what cannot be thought. So his idea is to kind of arrive at a border, in a certain sense, in the Tractatus. The product of the Tractatus is of a certain logical theory, in that sense, very different from what we'll be mainly talking about in the philosophical investigations, which is not a logical theory, but a grammatical investigation. There's a difference, which should be clear at some point. But in the Tractatus, it's a kind of through a certain understanding of the logical scaffolding of language, to kind of propose to arrive at a border of the thinkable or of the expressible by language. Since you cannot find yourself outside of that limit, because by definition it is not thinkable, this is the only way to arrive there. You have to draw the border from inside what is thinkable, right? But then there's a problem. There's a problem that is, and this is the structure, I'll go back to that. But there's a problem that is precisely formulated in the end. This is almost at the end of the book, like right before the last sentence, the infamous seventh proposition. And he says here, there are indeed things that cannot be put into words. They make themselves manifest. They are what is mystical. Then the correct method in philosophy would really be the following: to say nothing except what can be said, i.e. propositions of natural science, i.e. something that has nothing to do with philosophy. And then whenever someone else wanted to say something metaphysical, to demonstrate to him that he had failed to give a meaning to certain signs in his propositions. Although it would not be satisfying to the other person, he would not have the feeling that we were teaching him philosophy. This method would be the only strictly correct one. So, and right before the last one, my propositions serve as elucidations in the following way. Anyone who understands me eventually recognizes them as nonsensical when he has used them, as steps to climb up beyond them. He must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up it. He must transcend these propositions, and then he will see the world aright. So there's a problem here, right? Like he's declaring that the book is nonsense, basically. By the end of the book, he says, the method was to draw the limit from inside what is thinkable to the border of what is unthinkable. But in doing so, he already crossed the limit because he's talking nonsense. In a certain sense, he already crossed the limit when the limit is established. In a certain sense, he's obliged to talk about what he can't talk in order to define what he can talk about. So this is something that lends itself to a kind of third interpretation. We won't be really dealing with that, but I quite like the dialectist interpretation, like Graham Priest's interpretation, that in order to, when you get to the borders of thought, You get like the aletheias, like contradictions that must be thought of as true or must be accepted as true contradictions. Right? But anyway, this would be a kind of a third kind of solution to this different that you have. So, and the first one and the second one were historically the orthodox reading and then the resolute reading. What the orthodox reading said, if you go back to what Meredith Williams is saying, in a certain sense, the orthodox reading wants to say that Wittgenstein has positive thesis about philosophy, right? So you have to actually believe the theorizing that is embedded in the Tractatus, right? So how can you get out of this conundrum that he's declaring them by their own light to be nonsense, to be nonsensical propositions? So we won't be getting into that today. As I told you, as I mentioned, we will be dealing with the Tractatus in the fourth session because it is there that Meredith Williams trying to get to draw some comparisons with the Tractatus. But there is this difference in the Tractatus between saying and showing. So the logical form shows something. So there you get kind of, you may have the chance to get out of this conundrum, like you can't really say it, but you are kind of showing it, right? So in the Tractatus, there is kind of this solution for the Tractatus, but not for the philosophical investigation, that is fundamentally different. This is why I want to kind of ground this difference in the Tractatus, because it's a historically correct way to ground this difference, different readings, right? But then we can compare to the philosophical investigation, then this will shed some light in how did Wittgenstein change from one book to the other, right? And the second way to understand the resolute reading, to understand this, is just to say that it is all really, literally, nonsense. So the resolute reading does not say, like, there's no difference between kind of important nonsense and non-important nonsense, so to speak. There is only nonsense. And what Tractatus is doing is actually a kind of doing, it's not a theory. It is kind of almost like a kind of discipline that you must go through in order to get to this kind of state, which is actually kind of an ataraxia kind of state, right? But the theories are only kind of tools to arrive there. They are not really understood to be correct theories about language, about philosophy, about science, about whatever. So basically, historically, there is this kind of discussion between the orthodox reading, which came first, like Bertrand Russell's introduction may count as a kind of orthodox reading. And the resolute reading that comes way after with Cora Diamond, James Conant, and other people. Eventually, Hilary Putnam also was kind of on board with this interpretation. And there you go. Stanley Cavell, some very important people as well. So I just copied the structure, right? Like the Tractatus, as I think you know, like it's composed by numbered propositions, and there's a kind of scaffolding, a hierarchy in the numbers. Like the propositions number 1, there is number 1, 1.01, 1.012, 1.0123, and there you go. Like there's this kind of hierarchization of propositions, and the simple ones, the whole number propositions, right? Like the main ones are these 7 propositions that are distributed in the book. Like the first one says the world is all that is the case. Second one, and then you have like the commentaries upon that one. And then the second one, what is the case? A fact is the existence of states of affairs. Then you have like the little unfoldings of that one. And then the third one, a logical picture of facts is a thought. The fourth one, a thought is a proposition with a sense. The fifth one, a proposition is a truth function of elementary propositions, blah, blah, blah. Sixth one, the general form of the truth function is that stuff. This is the general form of the proposition. Okay. And the seventh one, what we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. The only one that does not unfold in other lesser propositions is the seventh one, because it's the last one in the book. So here you get like what I wrote on the side, like you have a kind of an ontology. The world is all that is the case. And then in this session, he's talking about objects, the idea of simple objects, states of affairs that are described by language. Objects are kind of what names are naming, and states of affairs are what prepositions are describing, right? And then you have the kind of approach to thought. Logical picture of facts is a thought. So a thought is enmeshed always with language here. And then the technical approach to the proposition. Then the main technical part of the book, this description of the functioning of language. And then he arrives at the limit. So if you read this in that way, you'll get basically this program, right? To draw a limit to thought from inside what is thinkable. So, yeah, this is the idea. So when you get near the seventh one, you get this what we call the suicide of the book, and then from there we got the two different the resolute and the orthodox readings. Okay, so this is just very cursorily, a very cursory view of the historical ground of this difference between the resolute reading and the orthodox reading. And then I want to compare this to the possible places in the philosophical investigations that lend themselves to the same kind of paradox, the same kind of antinomy, actually, between one reading and another reading. And this place is what Meredith Williams calls the metaphilosophical propositions. Okay, so this will be right. I'll do this right now. But any questions up until now? Quick ones, hopefully. Is that clear for now? Please, any doubts? Please do voice them. Let me take a look at the chat.
It was interesting that translation of the last points in the Tractatus says in English says that what should not be what cannot be spoken of should be passed over in silence, and passed over, this means that you can actually climb this thing and throw it away. Yeah, it's not the same as saying that you must not say.
In German, there's no Passover, actually. Wovon man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. Yeah.
But
actually,
this changes a lot.
I wouldn't really make too much of it, this kind of Passover thing. I mean, what he really means is, if you can't say it, you shouldn't say it. Like, this is basically, I think I take it like it's basically just that, right? Of course, there is a kind of more poetic way to state that there is a kind of process by which some individual that is reading the book can get to a certain point of view without thereby taking the propositions that were the tools for this view as true, as necessarily true, because they are nonsensical by the book's own standards. So this is kind of the difficulty. Like, you should know, like, the Tractatus is basically my favorite book in the world, right? But it's basically wrong. I think the book is basically wrong, but it's a very beautiful book. And this paradox is kind of incredibly beautiful as well. Anyway. Yeah, so... sobre aquilo que não se pode falar, deve se calar. Yeah, I think this is pretty... This seems to translate well the German version, it seems to me.
But this is about propositions of, this is about the level after the propositional level, not about the ontological level.
Yeah, you will have to talk about this in session 4. Because the ontological level is actually presupposed by the functioning of language. So actually, this is also a problem of interpretation of and segmentation of the Tractatus, that The ontology comes before, but actually in the order of reasons, the ontology is there just to give a reference to the language. So actually, if you have to rewrite the Tractatus in the order of explanations, you would have to start with language and then come to the ontology as presuppositions that can give a reference to the sentences of a language. So this is basically it. So, for instance, one of the symptoms of this, one of the problems with that is that, for instance, his concept of object is problematic for the common sense, really, because there's no objects in his particular sense. Of course, you won't really grasp the problem with this today. We'll have to wait for the fourth session. We'll talk a little bit more about this Tractatus thing. Yeah, one of the problems was that objects are there in order to give reference to sentences that are stating states of affairs. But an object has to be a simple object. So we'll touch a little bit on his self-criticism of that notion today, the idea that you have to have simple items, and these simple items compositionally give rise to states of affairs that are actually what we have access to, what we are describing in language. But we can't really describe an object because an object has to be simple. If you can describe an object, then the object is complex because you are relating the object to its own parts. So the object has parts. The object cannot have parts in the Tractatus. So here's the problem. So nothing that we ordinarily call an object is an object for the Tractatus. So he was pondering this for a long time. And this was one of the problems that give rise to the modification, to the change, his change of heart regarding the thesis of the Tractatus towards the philosophical investigations, like the impossibility of the simple, of the absolute simple. He was at some point thinking about, or maybe just a kind of sense data could be the objects, or kind of little spots in your visual field could be a kind of simple object. But then the simple object has to be simple, and therefore you cannot have an inferential relationship between an object and another, one state of affairs and another state of affairs. I know I'm getting technical very, very quickly, so this is a problem that I have, sorry. But anyway, you can't really have an inferential relationship stemming out of a simple object. So you would have to have every state of affairs independent of another state of affairs, which means if you have a red spot at point, I don't know, 137 of your visual field, like a pixel, you would if it's really simple, it's not propositional already, you would have to have a complete independence from that and the idea that you have a black spot in the same pixel. So there's this problem of red and black in the same place. So you can't have that. If you can't have that, the propositions are not independent. If the propositions are not independent, the objects are not simple. If the objects are not simple, you cannot have the theory of the Tractatus. So this is kind of the, in a nutshell, very quick, super quick version of the problem that motivates Wittgenstein in his change of heart from the Tractatus to the philosophical investigations, right? So it's untenable, actually, the Tractarian theory, in a certain sense, without a certain set of caveats. And then you get, I know you like Sellers a lot. Sellers kind of retrieves something of the Tractatus in his theory of picturing, but it's very different. You don't need this idea of the simple object or anything like that. So this is kind of the problem. Okay. Yeah, okay, you're just discussing, fine. Okay, so let's get on with it. Metaphilosophical passages in the investigation. So this is kind of the spot that is analogous to the ending of the Tractatus in the philosophical investigations, right? Like the spot that has this kind of lends itself to this antinomy of readings like this. For instance, I selected just these two propositions. I could have selected different paragraphs, but these two will do. Where does our investigation get its importance from, since it seemed only to destroy everything interesting? that is, all that is great and important, as it were all the buildings leaving behind only bits of stone and rubble. What we are destroying is nothing but houses of cards, and we are clearing up the ground of language on which they stand. And the following one, the results of philosophy are the uncovering of one or another piece of plain nonsense, and of bumps that the understanding has got by running its head up against the limits of language. These bumps make us see the value of the discovery. So I selected these two because it's kind of obvious that they, in a certain sense, they are kind of an echo of, there's an echo of the Tractatus there, like the idea of limits, the idea of running your head against the limits of language, right? And in the sense, and also another feature of this part of the philosophical investigations is kind of his ambivalent use of the word philosophy, right? Because from on one side, he's using philosophy as this kind of, I would say, ideological constructions of, you know, these houses of cards and things like that, illusory explanations. At the same time, he's using philosophy in his positive sense of uncovering these nonsenses and uncovering the ground where these buildings falter, really, and which are also the ground to our ordinary ways of going about with language. So this is kind of an interesting. There's a bunch of interesting features in this part of the book. And also it is the where you get to have this tension between theorizing and theory and non-theory, so to speak. So he actually wants to have no theory, or he says things that lends itself to this interpretation of offering no theories. At the same time, in order to get to that point of view, the philosophical investigations offer a lot of theory, a lot of kind of, not theory, maybe formally, in its form, but a lot of theoretical tools and ways of dealing with philosophical problems that are very far from, you know, common sense or, you know, ordinary. So there's also a kind of internal contradiction maybe here in this part of the book with the whole methodology, and Meredith Williams mentions this at some point in her first chapter. But it is also the spot where, therefore, you can get these two kinds of readings. The same relationship that you have between the orthodox and the resolute reading that you have for the ending of the Tractatus, you might have for the metaphilosophical investigations, metaphilosophical remarks in the philosophical investigations. So if you are a constructive philosopher interested in Wittgenstein, you may just, you know, this is bullshit, say something like that. This part I'm not interested in. And if you are a quietist, if you are interested in the ethics of getting out of a philosophical bottle, so to speak, you'll be paying attention exactly to this part of the book. So, and it gives the book kind of the same kind of paradoxical structure, right? Like you have to make theory in order to go out of theory, or you have to describe language in order to not describe language, or in order to say that the description of language is nonsense, but you have to describe it in order to say it. And the same holds for the philosophical investigations in a certain sense. So, in addition to this kind of different way to put this difference between kind of theoretical immanence that contradicts itself, right? That is present in both books. There is also the self-criticism by which the philosophical investigations deem the Tractatus as philosophical in the bad sense. So they have kind of there's the same paradoxical structure present in both books, but at the same time, the second one is accusing the first as a kind of fall into the illusory concept of philosophy. because the Tractatus wants to give us the crystal clear logical structure of language, which is an impossible endeavor by the standards of the philosophical investigation. But then you have like all this interesting kind of structure of contradictions where one book is contradicting another and each one is self-contradicting, but in different ways, and which maybe will filter the way we could understand that self-contradiction in the philosophical investigations. By the way, the philosophical investigations are criticized with Tractatus. So these are there's a whole structure of contradictions there that kind of gives us food for thought and things to talk and think about in terms of these possibilities, impossibilities of philosophy and of the immanent different concepts of philosophy that are at stake in each book. So it's quite interesting to compare them. Okay. So the self-criticism, I give also an example here, 97, 98. Thought is surrounded by a halo. Its essence, logic, presents an order. In fact, the a priori order of the world, that is the order of possibilities, which must be common to both world and thought. This is the description of the Tractatus given in the philosophical investigation. This order, it seems, must be utterly simple. It is prior to all experience, must run through all experience. No empirical cloudiness or uncertainty can be allowed to affect it. It must rather be of the purest crystal. But this crystal does not appear as an abstraction, but as something concrete indeed, as the most concrete, as it were the hardest thing there is. This is kind of the criticism of one of the critical remarks about the Tractatus in this session of the philosophical investigation. Then he goes on, we are under the illusion that what is peculiar, profound, essential in our investigations resides in its trying to grasp the incomparable essence of language, that is, the order existing between the concepts of proposition, word, proof, truth, experience, and so on. This order is a superorder between, so to speak, super concepts. Whereas, of course, if the words language, experience, world have a use, it must be as humble a one as that of the words table, lamp, door. 98. On the one hand, it is clear that every sentence in our language is in order as it is. That is to say, we are not striving after an ideal, as if our ordinary vague sentences had not yet got a quite unexceptional sense, and the perfect language awaited construction by us. On the other hand, it seems clear that where there is sense, there must be perfect order. So there must be perfect order even in the vaguest sentence. So this is kind of radically different from the Tractatus, right? So it's interesting to see like the kind of isomorphism between the two projects, but also the distance between one and the another. This is why there's no identity between them, but there's kind of an isomorphism given by the self-reference that the projects embed self-reference to themselves. Right? If you are talking about language, what you're talking about language should be applicable to the sentences of your theory. So this is the basic problem with both. Like not a problem, with the basic antinomy that is present in both projects. Usually, people only see this with that clearly in the Tractatus. This is why I kind of started with the Tractatus, but it is there in the philosophical investigation. And also, I think this tension is what starts off Meredith Williams' treatment of the philosophical investigations. It's because she locates and she acknowledges that this tension is present in the philosophical investigations as well. Okay. So Meredith Williams' Wittgenstein. So here is the continuation of what I had selected from her text. Yet we need not be forced to choose between these two interpretations, like the therapeutic one or the resolute and the orthodox, right? A therapeutic methodology of the sort emphasized by Wittgenstein's meta-philosophical remarks does lie at the heart of his project. But the way in which the quietist privileges such remarks obscures the content of Wittgenstein's theoretical diagnosis of philosophical illusion, a diagnosis that reveals very different pictures of language and mind. The philosophical investigation, especially part 1, is a carefully structured diagnostic work that defends, as part of that diagnostic work, an alternative positive picture of our situation in the world. Structure alone leads to agnostic reading of Wittgenstein. Content alone leads to submitting to the very philosophical illusions Wittgenstein seeks to dispel. The quietist correctly suggests that Wittgenstein is at his best when confronting an enemy. The constructivist is correct in finding positive views insinuated in and through the diagnostic critique. So kind of there's a shift between the therapeutical and the diagnostic here in the Meredith Williams' reading, wherein therefore the diagnosis is not only therapeutical, it's not only to evict the object that is producing the offending object that is producing the perplexity, right? The diagnostic should show a way out. So this is her difference, what she's proposing, and arguably this kind of puts her, may put, if she, even if she wants to differentiate herself from both camps, in a certain sense, it seems to put her in the orthodox reading camp, to say that there are philosophical theses there, right? But she will do it by unraveling carefully the metaphilosophical methodology that Wittgenstein is defending. So this would be kind of a difference in a certain sense. And we will get kind of a grasp, a better grasp of the difference when we get to, I'd say, chapter 5, where we'll talk about the reading by Baker and Hacker of Wittgenstein that is squarely in the orthodox camp. That we call usually the autonomy of grammar reading, but we'll get to that. Just to advance some possible objections to the way this is structured right away. Okay. So the central problem then that she takes to be the central problem, what she takes to be the core issue that is dealt with in the philosophical investigations, is the problem of normative similarity. So what does it mean to do the same, to go on in the same way, to apply a word as it was applied before? What does it mean to have normative similarity? So this is a main issue, and the issue that appears because Wittgenstein is motivating a kind of methodological shift in the way to approach the philosophy of language. And this only appears because of that. The problem of normative similarity appears as a problem because he has to kind of shift the point of view from the relationship between word and referent to the point of view what is it like to use words, what is it like to engage in continuing practices. So there's a genetic problem, which is kind of different to other kinds of previous kinds of philosophy of language. There's a genesis, and the genesis of these normativities is embedded in a pragmatic dimension. So therefore you will have all the components of a new problem emerges with this shift of point of view. Okay, there's something in the chat. Yeah, Curtis, that's true. But I take that to be kind of also one more level of ambiguity between the two books. There are a bunch of course, this also is an interesting remark that Curtis made in the chat. PI 98, I read it for the people that will listen to it to this afterwards. PI 98 is radically different in terms of what the PI is aiming at, philosophical investigation, in terms of its background understanding of what language consists in and what it's supposed to do, but there are quite similar passages about the order of language in the TLP already, e.g. 5.473 and elsewhere. What is 5.473? Actually, do you have it exactly what it is? That is, don't remember by memory.
Sorry, yeah. Instead of putting it in the chat, I'll just read this because it'll be faster.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's a passage where he's just talking, it's around the discussion of the general form of the proposition. But there he just kind of says logic must take care of itself. And then a little further down, he says, in a certain sense, we cannot make mistakes in logic on the basis of its tautological sort of.
Yeah, logic must take care of itself. This is kind of quite striking, like in a certain sense, there is both books have this kind of this metaphor, important metaphor of uncovering kind of the ground, right? So in the Tractatus, the excerpt that I read of the introduction has the same idea, right? Like to uncover the ground of what is meaningful, but it does it through a kind of a logical scaffolding. That this is completely different from the philosophical investigations, but there is a kind of similarity there in the sense, in two ways, I think. This idea of uncovering the ground in a certain sense, which we should not confuse with a kind of foundationalism. It's not a kind of foundationalism. The ground is just what gives determinacy to what we do. It's not necessarily a foundation in terms of in epistemological terms or in ontological terms, right? It's just what are the conditions of meaningfulness of language in both works. So they are asking the same question in a certain sense. Also a second similarity is that already in the Tractatus he says something like that philosophy is not a theory, it is an activity. So this is quite similar as well. So he's saying that I'm not giving you a theory of what is, I'm engaging in a form of activity. So this is, and the form of activity consists in uncovering the grounds of meaningfulness of language in order to also denounce philosophical illusion whenever it emerges. So this is common. This is common to both projects. I agree. And this kind of crossing between differences and similarities between both books kind of also enables a second kind of discussion in the secondary literature about whether there is a rupture or whether there is continuity between what we call early Wittgenstein and later Wittgenstein. Whether there is one philosophy or whether there are actually two different philosophies in Wittgenstein. So I think you have reasons for both views, but because of that, in a certain sense, it is almost like the question is answering itself, because if you have reasons for a rupture, it seems to me that the rupture can't be downplayed, really, because as I just read, there is an important shift, methodological shift. So I would say something to the extent that the objective is the same, but the methods are radically different. So therefore, in a certain sense, it is like two different philosophies, because you don't really, I would say you don't really identify a philosophy for its objectives, right? You identify a philosophy for its objectives and its methodology. So this is why I would say, yeah, you have actually two different approaches, not one. Yeah, thanks. So then the problem of normative similarity, the way she presents it, Wittgenstein's targets are the representationalist theory of language and its close ally, the Cartesian theory of mind. Wittgenstein's arguments are not only therapeutic, they are diagnostic. He aims to show how philosophers are in the grip of certain pictures of language and mind, and the consequences this has for their theories. At the foundation of philosophical theorizing are confusions about the role normative similarity plays in our language games. Whether asserting that the ball is red or continuing with a natural number sequence, the philosopher is blind to his assumptions of sameness that make such assertions and continuations transparent. So this is the problem, the kind of judgment of sameness is the problem of normative similarity. What does it mean to do the same? And doing the same is a necessary condition following Wittgenstein for meaningfulness in a sense, for what is meaningful in languages. Which is kind of weird, like there's also a bunch of different things to be said about this, which is, it's interesting like how Wittgenstein is interested in sameness, but at the same time he would come up with a certain less hard, less I would say less defined concept of identity in a certain sense. So it's not about identity either. It's about sameness. So it's kind of weird, but we'll discuss this point during the seminar. Okay, so then she goes on, which is, I think this is very striking in her approach to the book. She differentiates between two different arguments that Wittgenstein uses. So she says Wittgenstein's diagnostic method is tied to his use of two powerful arguments. The first are what I call his conflation arguments. The representational picture and the Cartesian picture are ushered in through grammatical errors. The most important of these errors is that of conflating the means of representation with the object of representation. And then there's these arguments pair diagnostically with paradox arguments. So I'll talk about the pair in a while, just wait a little bit. These arguments pair diagnostically with paradox argument, which is the second type of argument. Paradox arguments reveal the hidden contradictions that result from the confusions that are shown by the conflation arguments. So there's a kind of division of labor there. Wittgenstein uses 4 pairs of these arguments in his examination of representationalist and Cartesian theories. This is a kind of maybe contentious or I don't know, something that makes me wonder why the book is how it is, like Meredith Williams' book, not Wittgenstein's, because she actually selects 4 pairs of what she's calling conflation arguments and paradox arguments out of the book, and basically she passes over in silence the rest. She does not mention second part 2 almost. She does not mention the ending of part 1. I do think, otherwise I wouldn't be teaching this. This is a very striking and very original kind of approach to Wittgenstein, but at the same time, I would like to hear why these 4 pairs are basically what she's interested in. I take it that this paragraph right here that I selected kind of explains that she's interested in the critique of representationalism on one side and on Cartesianism on the other side. Maybe this is why she's selecting particularly these 4, because she deems these four pairs as the most powerful arguments. And maybe the rest of the book is kind of rehearsing these 4 in different guises. So this is a way of reading the philosophical investigations. Of course, that is up to debate, is whether it is adequate or not. But anyway, this is what she does. So it's not really, actually, you from these core arguments that she selects, you get to understand you get to understand really well, I think, what Wittgenstein is about, but you don't get to read the whole book. Actually, she's not offering a complete reading of the philosophical investigations. She's offering a reading that is concentrating upon these four pairs, right? So yeah, there's that. This was something that I was always a little bit puzzled with, because I don't think she's justifying this explicitly very well, actually. And she's treating these four arguments as the arguments that are in the book, these four pairs as the arguments that are in the book. But you have a bunch of other different language games that are present in the book as well. I quite like the electrocution language game. But anyway, she does not mention that one. But okay. Then, besides these four pairs, we will talk about the pairs here, right? I'm systematizing her approach for you guys. Okay, so this is very transparent. Her text is not as transparent. I'm trying to make this very transparent. Okay. So there's these four parts, four pairs of arguments in 8 different parts of the text. Okay, that she's dealing with primarily. And those are pairs of conflation and of paradox arguments, which will be clear here, like conflation 22 paradox. I'm dividing these, okay, and pairing them. And you'll get to see what they are dealing with, what each one is dealing with, right? Semantic aspect, practical aspect, epistemic aspect, and the ontological aspect of the problem of normative similarity, okay? So it's quite systematic what she comes up with for this book, right? But it is kind of a selection in a certain sense. And okay, so there are these 2 types of arguments, and there are 3 important themes in her approach. So 3 important positive themes will be developed. First, Wittgenstein's critique is not directed solely against representationalist theories of language and mind. He is critical of overly intellectualized theories in general. So Davidson's interpretation-based theory of meaning is one that succumbs to Wittgenstein's critique of interpretation. Grandham's inferentialist semantics, though not representational, nonetheless is a highly intellectualized picture of our use of language. So she's already mentioning here the targets of different critiques. We will be reading these authors and discussing. It will be hopefully quite exciting here in the seminar. So secondly, Wittgenstein takes the situation of initiate learning as having central methodological and explanatory importance. Every major problem and line of argument begins with a description of the child learning, whether it is the acquisition of a first language or initiation into arithmetic. The learning situation provides a window onto the structure of normativity, particularly the normativity of our very basic judgments of world or mind. Recognizing this entails recognition of the social character of language and mind. This leads to the 3rd main theme of the book. Language and mind are visible only against a background that cannot itself be representational. This, I like this. I think is amazing, actually, what she comes up with. But at the same time, I think it's ambiguous to say that it can't be representational. Does it mean it can't be represented? Does it mean, what does it actually mean? Anyway, Wittgenstein identifies 3 dimensions of this background: stage setting, mastery of techniques, and certainty. So those 3 are actually what composes her conception of a background to linguistic practice. So you have always those 3 things. Representational uses of language, indeed any use of language, requires a context in which a particular use of language occurs, the exercise of techniques for going on in the same way, and a shared sense of the obvious and the certain. Okay, so this is she's kind of fleshing out what she just said. Stage setting has to do with the context, stage setting, a context in which a particular use of language occurs. You have to set a stage wherein that makes sense. A mastery of techniques, which is what she mentions afterwards, the exercise of techniques for going on in the same way. So you have a technical aspect of language that answers to the necessity of normative similarity. And the third aspect, a shared sense of the obvious and the certain, which is the certainty aspect, not the truth, the certainty aspect. This is kind of bizarre for certain philosophical proclivities. Like it's not the truth, the truthful, not the truthful. You can have a perfectly fine language game, form of life functioning with basic certainty that aren't true. So this is quite interesting the way he replaces truth for certainty as that which is actually required for the use of language. Truth is another matter, right? So there's a bunch of things in the chat. Does anyone want to voice something, to say something, to ask a question?
I found a passage about the intellectualized thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that question? It's in one of the footnotes. So she's talking about, okay, I guess I could just read this. I'm taking it a little bit out of context, but I think it's relevant. The Tractatus Monophilosophy is directed to an intellectualized or task-oriented methodology, and with that, an intellectualist explanation of philosophical error. The error is the mistaken belief that philosophy is a science, and so the arena of its own problems, phenomena, and theories. The limits of the sayable put philosophy outside the cognitive arena. The later philosophy retains the view that traditional philosophy mistakenly aims at being a science, at constructing theories, following a scientific methodology, and the like. But the diagnosis of the later philosophy identifies the motivation not with the intellect, but with the volition. What has to be overcome is a difficulty having to do with the will rather than the intellect. It is an intellectualized willing that things be a certain way. When such a willing becomes disconnected from any true or false beliefs about natural processes, it becomes pathological.
Yeah, that's quite good. Do you want to comment on that? Do you have a certain take on that, or do you just wanted to add that footnote for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really great way of putting it. I'm not sure if I have a take on it right now. I'm going to be thinking about it though. I think it's really cool.
Okay. Yeah. The intellectualized thing is basically, I would say, like I could advance a little bit what we'll be discussing, but basically it's something that you can find in Quine and Davidson as opponents of Wittgenstein, the way she sets the stage for this discussion. And also in Brandom, but I think Brandom is kind of less prone to that intellectualized image. It's more subtle. Sellers, perhaps. I think she puts Sellers also in that basket in a certain sense. Even though I should also announce that Sellers is the closest philosopher to Wittgenstein. So this was a kind of very good kind of symptom that I'm in the right way and the right path. Anyway, but I combine Sellers and Wittgenstein, which is kind of a personal project of mine. Anyway, for those who know what I'm about. Anyway, go on, Anna. Sorry.
Yeah. So I guess one thing in terms of how I interpret this. So I'm a big fan of Kojin Karatani, and I've been reading his book, Architecture as Metaphor, which I think is so relevant to this.
Fantastic book, yeah.
The will to architecture, like I feel like that is really getting at this sort of like intellectualizing will. Like there's definitely kind of like congruency.
Have you read The Structure of World History?
Yes. Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah. Did you read the stuff that I wrote with a bunch of people, like the Atlas of Experimental Politics?
I have, yeah. I've been looking at the subset of theoretical practice. It's really cool stuff, yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm we are all heavily influenced by Karatani. Well, anyway, which is kind of weird for those. This seminar kind of actually is responding to some stuff that has to do with the political framework that we are putting up in the atlas and in some of my writings and stuff, but it's not apparent, right? Like we are here in the middle of a very kind of exegetical discussion of Wittgenstein, of philosophy of language, analytic philosophy and stuff like that. But actually, this is part of a bigger project, in a certain sense. What I think Wittgenstein brings to the table, and it has to do with this kind of intellectualized version of things, is a certain kind of, I don't like this word, right? I hate this word actually, but a kind of a materialist situating of the production of meaning. Like you can situate the production of meaning in a specific context, wherein specific kinds of standards and objects are displaying, actually certain specific objects are displaying the standards of the games. And from there, you get to, by recursion, arrive at more intellectualized, more, rarefied, more abstract ways of using language. So I think Wittgenstein, I'm not interested in Wittgenstein as a quietist philosopher that is kind of making it impossible to actually use and to actually be a rationalist in a certain sense, actually use the full resources of abstraction. I'm interested in Wittgenstein as giving a kind of an infrastructure, a genetic infrastructure for that has to do with the material reality where you get taught a language, you learn a language, and you learn to go on in the same way.
And
so,
I'm sorry.
Well,
yeah, this also really reminds me, honestly, of Lacan. Like, I know there's seems like this to be this huge gap, but at the same time, like, the way that Meredith Williams talks about blind obedience just reminds me so much of like the concept of the big other, and then especially like Zizek's interpretation. It just seems also like kind of talking about the same thing.
Yeah, that's a possible link as well. I'm at that gap, like Lacan. I mean, I read some Lacan, of course, but I'm not. I don't think I would say I'm not cocky enough to say something about Lacan, or arrogant enough to say something about Lacan, because I think I should read way more in order to really understand what Lacan is about. But anyway, on the face of it, I understand what you mean, of course. Yeah. So this is my take on it. What I was trying to answer you about this intellectualized thing is that within the book, what she wants to say is that, for instance, the other models, there are different models of semantic holism here, right? Like in Wittgenstein, you have like, not in the Tractatus, but arguably not in the Tractatus, but in the philosophical investigation, you have a kind of semantic holism, semantic holist kind of model for the functioning of language. But then the question emerges of the relationship between the semantic holism that is present in the philosophical investigation and different kinds of models of semantic holism, for instance, Quine and Davidson and Sellers and Brandom and all these people that we will be talking about, right? The problem with them, in terms that sheds light on what does it mean to have an intellectualized kind of approach, is that for the way, at least the way Meredith Williams construes their position is in terms of an epistemological investigation. For instance, the radical interpretation model is caught within a relationship of somebody that is coming up with hypotheses about the behavior of others. And Brandom's approach, which I think is a little less intellectualized, is not about hypotheses about the behaviors of others, but he takes the declarative statement as the unit of meaning. Therefore, you have a proposition, and therefore you have like a logical relationship between propositions as being the infrastructure of the language games. And for instance, Quine, the same. Quine's model is dealing, I mean, Quine's I'd say Quine's metaphor, guiding metaphor, is of somebody that's also proposing hypotheses about behavior. So it's always somebody who has a kind of interface, sensible interface with another, and they are proposing a kind of hypothesizing about the behavior of others. And therefore therefore the holism comes in, because you must have a kind of a glue, some way to glue all these behaviors into a logical whole of sorts. And these will be this role of a certain glue, some certain thing that makes it fit together, can be done through, can be I'm missing a word here. The role of this gluing can be made through the exercise by a logical theory, for instance, or by an epistemological way of construing the situation. But this is not the way in Wittgenstein. In Wittgenstein, you need the background that also has a kind of maybe an advantage if you accept this explanation over the others, that it also provides us with interface between the space of causes and the space of reasons in a much more intimate way than what we usually take from these other kinds of accounts. So this we'll be of course talking about this in some detail in the other sessions. But basically the problem with the intellectualized has to do with that, like they are kind of they're not taking into account the fact that you have to have already a bunch of stage setting and certainty and all of that in order to exercise language properly. So the methodological model is modeled upon a scientific kind of endeavor, right? So this is what is intellectualized about it, in a certain sense, which is different from what Wittgenstein is trying to do. I hope this makes a little bit clearer what the critique of intellectualism means here. And
Yeah, I mean, it's just maybe not the most relevant thing, but I kind of wanted to voice my dissatisfaction with the term intellectualized. It feels to me like very ad hominem in a way that like maybe paints thinkers who are representative of this methodological difference as incredibly naive, rather than maybe, I don't know, like one could say that Wittgenstein is doing something important in reacting to this, but nevertheless there might be a sort of conscious choice as a methodology to approach language in this kind of formal sense. And I don't know, like maybe it's not the biggest deal in the world, but maybe this kind of, for me, like I don't know this, and it might just be like a very personal sort of gripe that I have with this specific word, but it seems like yes, it's intellectualized in a sense that, you know, yeah, like these thinkers fundamentally didn't make a decision that decided to, you know, treat like this sort of real life stuff that Wittgenstein wants to bring back into the fold is kind of ancillary. Like you know, you can offer a critique of it, that's fine, and that's, but I don't know, it just, yeah, to me it seems like a little bit dismissive, but that might be, yeah, I don't know if that's relevant.
you're right. Maybe it is a bit dismissive. I don't like the word either. I'm not, you know, I'm a rationalist, so I mean, intellectualized, I'm always kind of not. It's not that I don't think she should use it. I understand the way she uses it. I'm trying to flesh out actually here because of this kind of misunderstanding. Like she fleshes out in terms of a different methodology. Like these methodologies are intellectualized in the sense that they are dealing with methodologically. They're of course not real objects, but methodologically kind of an individual observer making hypotheses about the behaviors of others. So this is in a certain sense intellectualized because it is unsituated within a certain practice, ongoing practice of language. So of course, an objection would be to say that Of course, they can't really presuppose an ongoing practice because the object of their model is to explain that practice. So therefore, they can't really presuppose the practice that's going on already, right? But the difference here is that Wittgenstein locates a different source for that, which is not the source that is prone to be described as scientific hypothesizing, right? Scientific hypothesizing for Wittgenstein is important, but it's something that comes later. You don't get into language by hypothesizing anything. You get into language by training. You have to be trained to it and to almost be. This is what blind obedience, the title, means. You don't really get to choose. This is kind of the violent moment, the moment of violence in the in the acquisition of language. But there is this moment of violence, and therefore, after the fact, you get to hypothesize, you get to revise, you get to do a bunch of different things. But there is this moment where you don't have it. You don't get to choose. This is a very important difference. So the origin, the source of this is not an intellectual, so to speak, source. You see, this is what is different in a certain sense. But yeah, maybe the wording is not great, but I think the critique is interesting. I think the critique is valid. The critique that is made by of these different approaches. And I was mentioning that Sellers is the closer one because she actually uses Sellers. It's the only one that she uses to illuminate Wittgenstein. All the time in the book, she's criticizing others from the point of view, the Wittgensteinian framework. But when she gets to Sellers, Sellers illuminates Wittgenstein with the concept of pattern-governed behavior, not normal being behavior, full-fledged. So the pattern-governed behavior is important, is a way to understand this, the coming into the space of reason. You're not there. You have to come into the space of reason, and to come into the space of reasons means to have ingrained patterns. So this is her approach, and this is why I think Sellers has the most important relationship here is between Sellers and Wittgenstein in the book. I think Sellers does illuminate a bit what Wittgenstein is gesturing at, but at the same time she makes a critique of Sellers in the sense that for Wittgenstein, in Sellers you have. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit just because a bunch of people already had courses about Sellers and stuff like that. But anyway, we'll see this in details afterwards. But in Sellers, you have this differentiation between intra-language transitions, language entry transitions, and language exit transitions, right? So it has this separation between what is specifically linguistic, which has to do with inferences, and the way sensible contents are enmeshed within these inferences. And in Wittgenstein, you don't have the separation. It is, which gives me actually a great segue to this slide, because the language game is language and the actions into which it is woven. This is quoted here, which is the 7th paragraph of the Philosophical Investigations. So you don't have really something that is not in the language that has to go to a language entry transition in order to be conceptualized. No, you are in a physical, social situation that is already linguistic, because you are seeing things as, you have a lacuna there, you're seeing things as the things you take them to be. So in a certain sense, you are already in language when you're dealing with things from the point of view of language games. So this is a crucial difference for her. I think this difference is not a big one anyway, but we'll discuss this in the right moment. I think Mrs. Live has also a question.
Yes, I have a question and remark concerning the metaphilosophical implications and the two interpretations, constructivist and quietist. When I was reading them, then I have thought about maybe this is very naive, but what about the possibility of so-called transgressivist interpretation in the vein of the way Gaston Bachelard reads Lautréamont as non-literature, or Laruelle talks about non-philosophy. Maybe it makes sense to read Wittgenstein's book as a first example of exercising non-philosophy, when he criticizes philosophy and then comes with his own some constructive positions. Maybe it's like proto-philosophy.
If I'm not mistaken, I have a book by I have to check the reference for you. I have here a book by some guy from Laruelle circle that actually I think he's arguing exactly that Wittgenstein was doing non-philosophy. So I don't remember the name of the guy. I have to. It's a physical book right here, like this. It's somewhere here in the house. I have to find it for you. But yeah, from the point of view of Laruellians, this is a certain. There's a way to go there. If I'm not mistaken, also Katerina Kolosova uses Wittgenstein's Maßstab from the Tractatus in her latest book in conjunction with Laruelle. So it's not unheard of. It's possible to have this relationship. I don't really know a lot about Laruelle, so I'm not really in the position to expose these possible relationships. But yeah, I think it's not unheard of. There are some people that are doing this kind of thing. It's not philosophy; it's a different kind of thing. And even relating it to Laruelle in certain sense.
Bachelard talks about Lautréamont in the same way. He says it's not a literature, it's something else which transgresses the boundaries of literature. So I suppose the idea of both non-philosophy.
Which Bachelard you're talking about? What's the text?
About Lautréamont.
Okay, Lautréamont. Okay.
About
because I read daytime Bachelard, so I'm not sure about those nighttime Bachelard. So yeah, but yeah, I think that's a possibility. That's a possibility. But anyway, the problem with that possibility is that even if it is not a discipline like philosophy, it seems that in order for you to feel that you are getting out of philosophy through reading this stuff, you have to believe it, right? Like there's a problem of the truth value of the statements contained there in the book, right? So how do you interpret these truth values, right? This is the main issue. You can rephrase the problem in the Tractatus in that way, like what is the truth value of what is saying? There is no truth value in the technical sense because it can't, by the standards of the book, you can't have truth values. Some of those statements. But it is by their own token. Therefore, you have to actually believe in them in order to even believe that they are not valid. So this is really a kind of a pickle, you see. So not sure if I'm not sure if a transgressive reading in the sense of declaring this, kind of a declaration. You declare this to not be philosophy, to be something else that goes outside of the boundary of philosophy. I'm not sure if this advances a lot. This would be of course, fallible and a first impression of this kind of this way out. Okay, but it's the first impression. I'm not saying that this is final. This is my position, but it's the first impression. It seems to me that the problem of how do you interpret the truthfulness of what's being said would make you fall onto maybe the quietist or the orthodox, or more onto the quietist, or more onto the orthodox readings, in a certain sense. So to declare this not to be philosophy means does not decide upon if you are more, if it means you are suspending the truth values, or if it means that you are taking this to be true, and therefore because it is true, it is not philosophy. You see, so there's a bunch of mediations there to actually flesh out and disentangle in order to really come up with what would be kind of a transgressive reading. For instance, Alain Badiou, I'll say Alain Badiou is kind of trying to give what would be a transgressive reading, saying that this is an anti-philosophy of sorts. Actually, he only likes the Tractatus, right? He only respects the Tractatus. And it's saying that the Tractatus is giving us an anti-philosophy, and the philosophical investigations is a kind of a new kind of sophistry. This is Alan Badiou's take on it. I think it's utterly wrong, but anyway, is an attempt to come up with the idea that this is a different kind of thing that is not philosophy, maybe anti-philosophy. He also thinks that Lacan is an anti-philosopher, or Nietzsche is an anti-philosopher. There you go. This family album of anti-philosophers.
Yeah.
I think somebody else wanted to comment something. Curtis, maybe. I'm not sure.
I was just going to mention the Badiou and anti-philosophy thing.
Okay.
It seems to me on the surface like it would be hard to disambiguate the two, even though I know Laruelle and Badiou have a lot of, at least, Laruelle seems to strongly dislike the sort of systematic bent of Badiou's philosophy. But yeah, that was where I went.
Okay, fine. So yeah. Yeah, these I mean continental or post-continental uses of Wittgenstein. Yeah. Trying to remember somebody else that comes up with this kind of solution. Yeah, don't remember now. Okay. No, I don't know. Sorry. Okay, what are language games then? Early in the investigations, Wittgenstein introduces the idea of a language game, which he characterizes in 3 ways. Language game is a simplified primitive language, like that of the builders from paragraph 2, and can be used to study the phenomena of language in primitive kinds of application, in which one can command a clear view of the aim and functioning of the words. They also, the game is by means of which children learn their native language. And finally, the language game is the whole consisting of language and the actions into which it is woven. In sum, a language game can be a methodological tool for the philosopher, the first meaning, a teaching device, the second meaning, or a descriptive explanatory notion that resists the contemporary urge to treat language as a relatively formal linguistic structure in abstraction from its use in situ, is the third meaning. The method of description is first and foremost the use of language games in constructing. While all 3 uses are in play in the investigations, the methodological dominates. The method of description is first and foremost the use of language games in constructing arguments against philosophical theories. So, yeah, these are the 3 meanings of language game, but they are kind of all kind of entangled and close enough, right? Like I think actually the more core one is the third, not the first. I mean, of course, the first comes in because you think of language as an assortment of language games. If language is an assortment of language games, you get to come up with different language games as a way to debunk certain philosophical ways to describe language. But this is because the philosophical or anti-philosophical, whatever you want, methodology is homogeneous to what it itself takes language to be. So if language is an assortment of language games, you have to be able to use language games against certain readings of language and show that they maybe are unsituated, or are not language games, or can't be, or there's no, or maybe to show that there's no assortment of language games that can amount to that solution sometimes. So so there's these 3 uses, I'd say, of language games, not necessarily 3 different meanings, 3 uses of language game as a simplified game, as in order to study language, as a teaching method, and as the whole, the idea of language and the actions together, right? Okay. So here we get to the core of what I wanted to say, because I think this is what's important for everything that comes after this. The segmentation of the text, Meredith Williams' choices, some of them we already discussed a little bit, but anyway, Meredith Williams proposes 4 pairs of conflation plus paradox arguments. So each pair has a conflation argument and a paradox argument as being the most important ones in part 1 of the philosophical investigations. The first pair has no specific language game associated with it, while the 3 other pairs consist in 6 different language games. Okay, I think this is kind of weird. This is also a problem that I have. Why is it that the first one is 2 things? Why is it that the first one has no language game associated? At the same time, why is it that the first one starts in paragraph 22 while the second pair starts in paragraph 2? So why the second one is not the first? I take it that the sequence is decided not by the conflation arguments, but by the paradox arguments, because the conflation arguments are thought of as kind of a setting of the terms in which the paradox argument will come in and, you know, flesh out and develop the conflation into a full paradox. So in a certain sense, I take these pairs in a certain sense to be kind of 4 arguments, basically. And the argument is completed only in the paradox argument. So the sequence, the proper sequence of them is given by the paradox argument. Like paradox, the first paradox argument in the first pair starts in 95. The second paradox argument in the second pair starts in 143. The third paradox argument in the third pair starts in 258, and the fourth one starts in 293. Okay, so there you get like a very neat, clear sequence. But the conflation arguments kind of conflates things a little bit anyway. Anyway, let's go. The metaphilosophical passages occur between the first 2 conflation arguments and the rest. So the metaphilosophical passages come in after, you know, after 22. Actually, the first paradox argument is in the middle of the metaphilosophical section. So this is not really tidy, right? Like the beginning is kind of messy, but let's believe her and let's see what this can give us in terms of understanding of the philosophical investigations. Okay. Okay, so here it is. The first pair has the conflation argument in 22 with no specific language game, and the paradox argument in 95 with no specific language game, and it deals with meaning and what she calls the semantic aspect of normative similarity. The second pair is the builder's game. The conflation argument is a builder's game. The paradox argument is a natural number sequence in 143. And they deal with rules, or what she calls the practical aspect of normative similarity. The third one, the conflation argument, is the color chart of 48-49. Okay? The paradox one is the self-knowledge or the sensation diary in 258. It deals with private sensation or the epistemic aspect. Here we get to a different problem, but I'll deal with that right away in what follows. The fourth one, the conflation argument, is a Parisian meter language game in 50. And the paradox argument is the beetle in a box game in 293. They deal with consciousness and they deal with the ontological aspect of normative similarity. We'll flesh this out a little bit later. So the paragraphs themselves. So I took the beginning of each section in Wittgenstein, so I get a flavor of what's going on in these sections. Okay. So the first pair, meaning, is the subject, and the semantic aspect of normative similarity. This is straightforward enough. Okay. So I took 22. Frege's idea that every assertion contains an assumption, which is the thing that is asserted, really rests on the possibility found in our language of writing every statement in the form, it is asserted that such and such is the case. But that such and such is the case is not a sentence in our language, meaning the one that starts with the clause, the that clause, right? That's such and such. This is not a sentence. So far, it is not a move in the language game. And if I write not it is asserted that, but it is asserted such and such is the case, the words it is asserted simply become superfluous. So actually the idea here is like the deep analysis that Frege gives of the proposition in terms of an assumption, right? That is asserted, an assumption and an assertion. I like this kind of duplicity of the proposition, is criticizing it because in the surface of the language, you don't really have this difference, like the assertion and the assumption, because to assert something is to give an assumption that is in the sense that you assert it. So this is of course, given in that here in this introductory mode, it sounds maybe a bit rough, but this will be the subject of session 3 of the seminar. So we'll get to that. This is just to give a flavor of what are the pairs, right? So this is the conflation argument. And she says, the conflation argument of 22 holds that Frege's idea results from a failure to keep straight the difference between the sentences. It is asserted that P and it is asserted P. Confusing prepositional function with assertoric shape gives rise to the discovery of the proposition, which is tailored to do the necessary explanatory work. The peculiar metaphysical features attributed to the proposition in order to assure its explanatory success leads to the elimination of a contrast between true and false. This is, you have to wait. This is, of course, this is a lot. This is quite complex, but you have to wait the second and third sessions for that, because otherwise I don't have time to go to this today. So 95, I took a little extract from 95. Thought must be something unique. When we say and mean that such and such is the case, we and our meaning do not stop anywhere short of the fact, but we mean this is so. But this paradox, which has the form of a truism, can also be expressed in this way. Thought can be of what is not the case. So if the paradox is here, like if the thought does not short anywhere of the fact, but the thought can be of what is not the case. But if it's not the case, it's not a fact. So what the fuck you will do with that? So this is the paradox argument, right? The first one. So the first is a conflation, the second is a paradox. This is the pair, right? This is the first pair. So now the second pair, the subject of which is rules, and deals with the practical aspect of normative similarity. Maybe this is too little, right? Like, let me see if this helps. That makes it difficult to me. Just a second. Yeah, this is a bit better. Okay. Okay, rules and practical aspect. So she mentions, of course, the builder's game, like the second pair, the conflation argument is a bunch of paragraphs, but basically it is the builder's game. So I quote, that philosophical concept of meaning has its place in a primitive idea of the way language functions. But one can also say that it is the idea of a language more primitive than ours. Let us imagine a language for which the description given by Augustine is right. The language is meant to serve for communication between builder A and an assistant B. A is building with building stones. There are blocks, pillars, slabs, and beams. B has to pass the stones that in the order in the order in which A needs them. For this purpose, they use a language consisting of the words block, pillar, slab, beam. A calls them out. B brings the stone, which he has learned to bring at such and such a call. Conceive this as a complete primitive language. This is the beginning of the builder's game, right? And the paradox argument is 143, that deals with rules. That has to do is the natural number sequence. And the quote is, let us now examine the following kind of language game. When A gives an order, B has to write down series of signs according to a certain formation rule. The first of these series is meant to be that of the natural numbers in decimal notation. How does he get to understand this notation? First of all, series of numbers will be written down for him, and he will be required to copy them. I'll skip the parentheses. And here already there is a normal and an abnormal learner's reaction. At first, perhaps we guide his hand in writing out the series 0 to 9, but then the possibility of getting him to understand will depend on his going on to write it down independently. So this is 143. Meredith Williams' commentary. She comments upon the Builder's Game. She says, the Builder's Game exemplifies a language in which its expressions are naturally thought to name kinds of objects. The philosophical thesis is that the objects, in being named by the expressions, constitute the meanings of these terms. These theses, Wittgenstein argues, results from conflating ostensive definition, using an object as an exemplar in the explanation of the meaning of a word, and ostensive teaching or training, causally affecting an association between a word and a kind of object through training. So this is a conflation. And for 143, she says, interpretation seems best suited to explain how we use a rule or formula to go on in the same way, for it selects one method of projection among the many possible ones. But paradoxically, it is interpretation that obliterates the very distinction between correct and incorrect, and so the intelligibility of going on in the same way. The contrast between correct and incorrect continuation collapses. This is the paradox of interpretation. Keep that in mind. I won't be able to explain all this right now. This is an introductory session, so keep in mind just the architecture of this thing and the flavors that she's offering. Okay, this is a second pair. Sorry. Okay, third pair. Where is it? Okay, third pair: private sensation and epistemic aspect. Okay. She gives 48. 48 says, let us apply the method of paragraph 2, the Builder's Game, to the account in the Plato's dialogue that Wittgenstein is commenting upon in this session. Let us consider a language game for which this account is really valid. The language serves to describe combinations of colored squares on a surface. The squares form a complex like a chessboard. There are red, green, white, and black squares. The words of the language are correspondingly R, G, W, B, and a sentence is a series of these words. So comes up also with a kind of language that functions like the Tractarian language, the language of the Tractatus, right? This is 48. About this, Williams says, the simple color chart of PI 48 is used to show that the philosophical idea of absolute simplicity involves conflating our normal reactions to the elements of the chart with properties intrinsic to those elements. The distinction between simple and complex is relative to our interests and our normal reactions, where both are normatively structured. But the distinction is mistakenly taken to reflect categorical properties of the objects themselves. Okay? And for the paradox argument of the pair is 258, which says, let us imagine the following case. I want to keep a diary about the recurrence of a certain sensation. To this end, I associate it with the sign S and write this sign in a calendar for every day on which I have a sensation. I will remark, first of all, that a definition of the sign cannot be formulated, but still I can give myself a kind of ostensive definition. How? Can I point to the sensation? Not in the ordinary sense. This is 258. And Williams comments upon it in that sense, in this way. Merely having a sensation should set the standard for recognition or self-knowledge. But the hypothesis that the sensation itself sets the standard renders us mute. One gets to the point where one would like just to emit an inarticulate sound. This is a quote from Wittgenstein. What is easiest to know in Descartes' phrase, namely the contents of one's own mind, is rendered unknowable. Cartesian transparent subjectivity eliminates self-knowledge. The contrast between is and seems collapses. This is the paradox of self-knowledge. 3 and 4, though, I have to mention this right away. It's kind of weird, right? Because she proposes a pair, and as you are seeing, there's a kind of a theme, and then there's an aspect of normative similarity that is being dealt with. The theme of the first was meaning. Both arguments dealt with meaning. That was clear enough. The theme of the second pair was rules. Both dealt with rules. The first one was the builder's game. Second one was a natural number sequence. Both deal with rules, and these are the pragmatic aspects. But here is kind of tricky. Private sensation. Private sensation is obviously the subject of 258, but it's not really the subject of 48, right? Like the square with different colors. This is not necessarily what's at stake in the language game of 48. I'll have to deal with it in a moment, just to put this out. So the fourth one has the same problem, but we'll see. Fourth pair, consciousness, the guiding theme, and the ontological aspect of normative similarity, the thing being discussed. So she pairs 50 to 293. 50 says, one would, however, like to say, existence cannot be attributed to an element, for if it did not exist, one could not even name it, and so one could say nothing at all of it. This is his opponent, right? He does not believe this. And he says, but let us consider an analogous case. There is one thing of which one can say, neither that it is 1 meter long, nor that it is not 1 meter long, and that is the standard meter in Paris. But this is, of course, not to ascribe any extraordinary property to it, but only to mark its peculiar role in the language game of measuring with a meter rule. And she comments upon this one. The third conflation argument, actually it's the fourth conflation argument, it is the third conflation language game. Remember that there are 4 pairs, right? The first one does not have a specific language game, so therefore it's the third language game, not the third argument. The third conflation language game, therefore, using the standard meter stick as its touchstone, examines the thesis that there must be some ultimate simple substance of the world, the measure of reality. Such substance can neither be said to exist nor not to exist. The contradictory flavor that gives profundity to this metaphysical idea results from conflating the means of representation with what it represents. The conflation turns a truism. The standard meter, since it sets the standard for being 1 meter long, is not itself correctly describable as either 1 meter long or not 1 meter long, into a substantive categorical claim about the peculiar properties of the metal bar that is used to set the standard. So this is regarding the conflation argument of the fourth pair. The paradox argument of the fourth pair says, 293, suppose everyone had a box with something in it. We call it a beetle. No one can look into anyone else's box, and everyone says he knows what a beetle is only by looking at his beetle. Here it would be quite possible for everyone to have something different in his box. One might even imagine such a thing constantly changing. But suppose the word beetle has a use in these people's language. If so, it would not be used as the name of a thing. The thing in the box has no place in the language game at all, not even as a something, or the box might even be empty. No, one can divide through by the thing in the box. It cancels out whatever it is. That is to say, if we construe the grammar of the expression of sensation on the model of object and designation, the object drops out of consideration as irrelevant. And she talks about what she states about the paradox argument of the fourth pair is the second extract that I take from Williams. And the appeal to sensations as private objects eliminates sensations altogether. The contrast between something and nothing collapses. This is the paradox of sensation. So she actually gives different names to these paradox, right? As I think it was clear. First one, it's unclear if it has a name, but the second one is the paradox of interpretation, the practical aspect of normative similarity, meaning that interpretation cannot do the job that it's supposed to do. You have to follow a rule without interpretation, actually, because interpretation introduced a gerrymandering problem. We'll be looking into it in more detail. The second one is the paradox of self-knowledge, the idea of that you, without an external criterion for the use of S for a sensation that you have, the idea to make a diary of sensation is idle. It does not make any work whatsoever, right? This is the paradox of self-knowledge. You don't really know yourself without the holism and the external criteria that are part and parcel of language use. And the fourth one is called the paradox of sensation. That is the idea that to understand since the language for sensations in the model of object and designation makes the object irrelevant. So this is the fourth one. So you have these four different pairs. I was mentioning the problem that I saw with the third and the fourth pair, more like a formal problem, because she names also the object that is dealt with by the pair, meaning, namely meaning, rules, private sensation, and consciousness, while the conflation arguments in the third and fourth pair don't deal with private sensation for the third pair. It is the color square, right? And with consciousness in the fourth pair, which is the Parisian meter, right? So two potentially problematic pairs. Meredith-Williams divides the four pairs into different aspects of the normative similarity problem: the semantic, the pragmatic, the epistemic, and the ontological. But beyond that, she relates the paradoxical arguments to different problems: meaning, rules, private sensation, and consciousness. The conflation arguments fit properly into the themes of the first two pairs, but the color chart of the Parisian meter argument do not seem to fall into the themes of private sensation and consciousness. So she gives an explanation for this in pages 100 to 103. We're not there yet, but anyway, just I looked into it. I was searching for a kind of justification for this. So the third pair is a conflation of simplicity as a result of a background with simplicity in the object. The color chart does not directly relate to the theme of private sensation, but it does relate to the sensation diary in the sense of the concept of simple involved in the problem and in the role of the background, right? And the fourth pair, there's a confusion of a measurement technique or criterion with a special or ideal object that is also present in the model of object and designation when it is applied to the problem of consciousness, right? In the beetle in the box problem. So the four is a problem of the definition of what is the object, what is the role of the object, therefore the ontological problem of normative similarity, right? And the third is what counts as a simple or as a criterion by which we judge sameness. Therefore, the epistemic problem of normative similarity, right? So I think maybe it's clear enough. Yeah, I'm getting to the end. Any question about this mess of that I'm trying to disentangle for you guys? Because I think it is actually pretty good, kind of categorization of what's happening in these sessions in the philosophical investigations, even though I don't really think that Meredith-Williams does the best job at exposing them. I think she ought to have a kind of a scheme somewhere or a diagram or whatever. Anyway, but yeah, Lika?
Can you please go back to the slides where the private sensations and color charts? Yes, red, green, white, black, or
this is not really important, but it's just like let me see. I
have a question about it. So yes, I think I've read this, and maybe this paragraph was supposed to give us a language game where those colors are not universally given colors, but just colors that Wittgenstein has made up, and maybe this is an example of private sensations
I think it's an
in
example.
sense,
Yeah, I
in
think
the
you're
sense
touching
of
upon something.
undefined, in the sense
Yeah.
of undefined private sensations, and differentiating between them, even though they are not defined in any way. So maybe the right sequence would be first to mention this diary of sensation, where there is only one undefined sensation, and then there are four of them, and you somehow distinguish them from one another. But does it help to actually
The
grasp
problem,
them?
yeah, I understand what you mean. I mean, I understand what you mean in the following sense. Like the colors that are used in the squares are sensations.
Yeah,
Like to have a black sensation, a white sensation, a green sensation, a red sensation. Okay, but these are publicly available squares, right? So this is why I'm not sure this is as tidy as Meredith Williams wants it to be, because in 258, the sensation itself is not available to anybody else, whereas in 48 it is available. It's black square, green square, white square, and red square. That's it. Everybody knows what it is. So this is what I think is not really tidy, like the pairing in that sense. But I think their relationship is a different one. This is what I wanted to explain with this, right? The relationship is about the simplicity that results of the lack of a background. Like the 48 wants to deal with the problem of symbols that have names like red square, green square, white square, black square. And they are treated as the foundation of language, right? Whereas what Wittgenstein wants to show is that you have to have other abilities in order to use these squares and treat them as units. The red square, green square, white square, and black square as units, as simple units. So simplicity is a result of a mastery, as a result of the mastery of technique. Is not mastery of technique that comes from simplicity, right? This is a problem, and I think this actually has a relationship, a close relationship. I think she's right about that with 258 in the sense of the individuation of S, of the sensation that nobody else knows that you have. You have to have the means to individuate it, to re-identify it, not just identify once. You have to re-identify it. How come you can? How will you identify something that you have no other criterion through which you can do it, right? Wittgenstein even says something very funny, like it is like buying a second newspaper in order to see if the news that are given in a second copy of the same newspaper, in order to see if the news given in the first copy are real or right. Like, no, this is not doing any work. You are comparing it with itself, so it's not doing any work. This is the problem, right? So the individuation, actually, it's not really private sensation. The third pair is about the individuation of items, of epistemic items, I'll say. And of course, this has a very important set of consequences for private sensations. Whereas in the fourth pair, it's the same problem. Like, it's not really obvious that this deals with consciousness, the idea of the Parisian meter, right? But it's not really. It's also a question of the individuation of a standard, but with a little shift of perspective, I'd say, that accounts for the difference between the third being the epistemic aspect and the fourth being the ontological. That is, in the fourth one, it is the role of the object that is being thematized. What is the role of the Parisian meter? What is the role of the beetle in the box, if it has one, right? So this is why there's a ontological aspect. There's things in the world that fill certain roles within the language. So what are these objects? What are this stuff that is being used to define standards, to define reference, and all of that? So this is why there's a kind of a difference between third and fourth. third being epistemic, the fourth being the ontological aspect. Of course, they are all entwined, right? And the first being the semantic aspect, which is also entwined with the practical aspect, right? And the epistemic and the ontological. They are different aspects of the same phenomenon of normative similarity. So this is the basic idea. I'll just give them the two last slides just to finish for today. We're approaching the end of the session. Like we'll have like still 20 minutes for discussion. I think 15 minutes if we have questions or comments or anything. So the three dimensions, and then do you remember I show a slide, the one that I said was really important. These three things, right? The third main theme of the book, the last paragraph here. Language and mind are visible only against a background that cannot be self-representational. Wittgenstein identifies three dimensions: the stage setting, right? The mastery of techniques and certainty. I commented this briefly about these three aspects, and this is taken again here, like three conflation arguments. The three conflation arguments, language games, reflect different moments in the process of language use, which reflect the different dimensions of the background. Paragraph 6 on ostension and stage setting reflects acquisition, learning. Paragraph 48, the recognition of simples and mastery of technique, reflects on use, technique. You have a mastery of a technique in order to use something. You have to learn to recognize the black, the green, the red square, right? Paragraph 50, the role of the standard and of background certainty that sustains social practice. I think this is really striking. I think the value of these three different dimensions will be clear to you after you read a little bit more, I think. But it's really striking that you have, like, in one of the conflation arguments has to do with acquisition of language, learning, and in the builder's game you have all this reflection on the difference between ostensive definition and ostensive training. So ostensive training is really important, and ostensive training is part of stage setting. It's not really a move in the game of reason yet, but it is kind of, you learn to correlate certain linguistic signs, sounding signs, or marks on paper with certain objects, right? So this is stage setting. This has to do with acquisition. Paragraph 48, the one about the squares, the recognition of the simples, of the simple items that are counting as simple within a certain practice. And if they are counting as simples within a certain practice, they are the result of certain mastery of a certain technique that has to do with the use of language. So using language, by using language, you are also slicing up the world in simples, in different kinds of simples, in different kinds of criteria, right? And in paragraph 50, the role of the standard and background certainty. You have to be certain that 1 meter is 1 meter, and use a kind of standard to define that, which means you are sustaining the social practice, which means you are kind of sustaining the same standard of a certain social group, right? So acquisition, use, and the sustaining of the social world within a certain set of practices that define certain standards and certain background certainties, right? Certainty, I said, not truth, certainty. So, and then she says, Wittgenstein identifies 3 dimensions of this background. This is the same, I recopied the ending of that paragraph. Stage setting, mastery of techniques, and certainty. So this is this is kind of repeating myself. This is what I just said, like stage setting, first one, mastery of technique, the second, and shared certainty, the third. So this will only get the full-fledged version in chapter 7 of the book, but we have to wait a long time for that. Anyway, so this was what I had for today. So yeah, the new center is reminding me that we can do the introductions now if you want, or if you want also to discuss any questions, or if you don't have any questions, we'll do just the round of introductions. And that's it. No questions?
I'm still confused about the about 48, but I think we're gonna we'll do it. We'll do it in more detail later. So
Yeah. This will be the whole seminar will be talking about this. So yeah. The PP, the PowerPoints. Yeah, of course, I always do that. I'll try to use. So yeah, and I think it is crucial for this seminar because the book is not as organized as the little diagrams and lists that I compiled from it. So yeah, I think it's quite important for you to have the PowerPoints. Any more questions? So we'll do introductions then. Go on, Curtis.
Okay, sure. I can begin.
You want to begin?
Regis,
okay, Regis, go on. I said Curtis, but anyway, because I'm
okay, no problem.
I'm going in the order that I'm seeing. I'm not sure what is the order that you're seeing. Anyway, but go on, Curtis. Then we're about to begin.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Curtis. I teach at OCAD and NASCAD universities in Canada, 2 art schools there, philosophy and art theory. And generally speaking, my interests are this notion of sense, in particular with reference to Wittgenstein and Deleuze, sort of across their corpuses. For this course, I mean, obviously, it's kind of tailor-made for me in a way. So, but specifically, I'm interested in the genesis of the normative in relation to some of the stuff we've already talked about relative to the late Wittgenstein, and how I see it kind of similarly to Williams and in tension with the discussion of normativity in mid 20th century and late 20th century analytic philosophy. So in relation to Brandon's inferential semantics or other people, and specifically how aesthetics might aesthetic value as one part of normative discourse sits in a kind of uneasy position with a lot of other ideas of normativity in that tradition, the broad sort of tradition, and how maybe Wittgenstein has something to say about that. So that's it. Thanks.
That's great, Curtis. I also recommend Curtis's writings if you are interested in the relationship between Wittgenstein and Deleuze. It's quite rare to have somebody that talks about these two, and Curtis has a bunch of stuff to say about it. So just recommending your stuff to the class. Regis.
Okay, now Regis, yes, my name is Regis. I'm from Brazil, also like Caron. I am a PhD candidate at University of São Paulo. I'm studying Hegel. I'm continuing to study Hegel's science of logic. For now, the object of my study is the logical concept of life in the science of logic. So one of my interests in this seminar is the idea of forms of life in Wittgenstein, and maybe there are some relations to between Wittgenstein and Hegel and their critique of representationalism, of representational thought. And yeah, I think for now is that. Yeah, and yeah.
Thanks, Regis. Anna?
Oh, hi, I'm Anna. I'm an undergraduate right now studying with my major in East Asian studies and a minor in economics. I'm kind of a Kojin Karatani fangirl. And I'm also interested in a lot of other stuff, though, like Marxist political economy and sort of the Lacanian Marxist trend, continental philosophy, as well as like, you know, this sort of kind of analytic stuff that you've been talking about, like JP, like the sort of post-Wittgenstein. Like I've been, I actually submitted a conference, sorry, I submitted an abstract to a conference, sort of talk about like Graham Priest and Wittgenstein, actually, because sort of that, it's part of why I'm so excited to take this, is the idea of like, is it possible that the philosophical investigations can be read from like a dialetheist perspective, and like what would that actually
Yes.
get? So like
The answer is
that's
yes.
kind of my angle on this.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Lika?
Hello, I'm Lika Kareva. I'm from Russia, from Moscow. I have a blog called Minecraft Philosophy, where I publish my philosophical meditations. I like Sellers, I like Stoicism. And also I've been teaching the philosophy of art for a while. I've been teaching first Kantian aesthetic judgments, and sensory universals were my subject of investigation there. But actually the last course that I did was on analytic philosophy of art, which is called anti-essentialism, and which is basically a bunch of philosophers who are arguing about who has a better understanding of Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations. And also they are, yes, I've read this.
You mean in the philosophy of art?
Yes.
What?
There is.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with
Yes,
that.
there is a movement called anti-essentialism. It is from the 60s to 80s. They have three ways.
I mean, like Morris White's, this kind of thing.
Yeah. And Dickey.
Yeah, George Dickey, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, they have this thing called no theory of art. So they people, artists who hate theory and philosophy, they can be dragged into philosophy by this no theory. Yeah, so I've read lectures on aesthetics. It was very interesting, even though we don't know if it is a proper Wittgensteinian text, but it is, I've checked that it was lectured between the Tractatus and investigations. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Lika. Kasia?
I just said that my monograph in the undergrad was on lectures on aesthetics precisely. This is one of my favorite texts from Wittgenstein. My name is Kasia. Well, as I said, in the undergrad years, I studied a lot Wittgenstein. In my master's, I wrote about Reza Negrestani's Intelligence and Spirit. Tried to give it some kind of explanation of the foundations of the project, relating a lot with the concepts of forms of life. That's something that Reza himself started to do afterwards. And currently very interested in feminist interpretations of Wittgenstein, particularly from Naomi Shimon and Cressida Hayes, where Cressida particularly does a reading of Wittgenstein that conjoins him with Foucault's ethics of technologies of self-transformation, and seeing gender kind of like on the optics of family resemblance. And I don't know, I'm trying to weave this all together, like in a rationalist perspective, and seeing the radical feminism of Shulamit Firestone as some kind of radically rationalist perspective on feminism. So currently I'm working on that.
Yeah, that's a lot. Thank you, Katja. Naomi Shimon was also a text that I used in a previous, she wrote a text I used in a previous course. I don't remember if it was the world making, one of the world making courses. Yeah, I had to drop this word, you know, it's become a buzzword. Anyway, and
Yeah, hi, and I live in Berlin at the moment. Yeah, I can actually, yeah, world making being a buzzword, that's kind of one of the things that I'm interested in at the moment. I wanted to take this course because one of my research interests is thinking about like problematizing the idea of forms of life and the possible contexts in which that is used, and thinking about like reconciliation of seemingly disparate forms of life at certain levels of description in a sort of political project of universalism at like large scale worlds. I don't know, sorry, that was a bit jargony. Like, yeah, just like making sense of forms of life within the context of a universalist political project of some kind. And that's...
yeah, that's clear enough. Yeah, great.
Okay.
Go on.
Basically, how do we do like communism? What's the sort of like logical foundations and framework for like something like that? Sorry, I'm a bit tired. Yeah, so I guess like I'm trying to deepen my understanding a little bit of, you know, what the more precise meaning, you know, what are the different sort of ramifications and consequences of like forms of life as Wittgenstein articulates it, because I think I have a naive understanding of what he means by forms of life. So that's my main interest in this course.
Maybe, and you'll be interested in the Juliet Floyd approach to forms of life in Wittgenstein that Cassie also used in her dissertation. It's an interesting kind of bringing together this kind of more realist, more materialist kind of account that you get from Meredith Williams with a kind of a logical codification through the relationship with Alan Turing. So it's kind of, well, yeah, it's kind of complex. It's not, I can't really explain it right now. But anyway, I think maybe that would be something interesting for your project, I think. So, Henrique.
Okay, hey, my name is Henrique. I live in Brazil. I teach history and elective disciplines in Brazilian state schools. My current interests are mainly Marxist political economy, the transition between what we would call the feudal system, to the capitalist system in the early 16th century. I wrote a text to my final, I forgot how to say this, final text to my graduation about this, the transition debate in the middle of the 20th century between Paul Sweezy and Maurice Dobb. And currently, I chose the seminar because I already did a seminar on New Center dealing with Wittgenstein and found it really interesting. I didn't have at the time I didn't have read anything by Wittgenstein, but I found it really interesting. Really,
May I ask you which seminar did you take?
Let me see if I can remember the name. It was by the Ana Longo instructed it.
Ana Longo, okay, that's great.
Yeah,
great one. Yeah.
It was my first meeting with the work of Wittgenstein, and I chose this seminar because I'm trying to familiarize myself better with this author, because in the first seminar, I got out of there thinking maybe I didn't understand what he meant actually, right? In a deep
You
level.
have 2 months to get a better grasp here.
Yeah.
Anyway, also, if you're interested in political economy and this kind of thing, that the next seminar, this is a bit unclear right now because this one's about philosophy of language, but the next seminar is already announced, which will be by about my next seminar. Zonhettel's understanding of the materialist critique of epistemology and the relationship, I mean, the possible comparisons of that with the Salesian approach. So actually, this is kind of the secret behind this course. I take this one as a kind of a preparation also to that problem. So we won't be dealing with critique of political economy here, but we will be dealing with critique of political economy in the next one, and presupposing what we had seen here. So this is kind of the weird relationship that I'm trying to.
Yeah, it's great to hear this. Okay.
Raviv?
Hey, my name is Raviv. I'm from New York City. That's where I am living right now also. I have my only formal training is in pure math and physics in undergrad, and I've been trying to teach myself philosophy over the past few years. I don't know if you remember this, JP, but I was in a reading group for Irad Kimhi's Thinking and Being that I think you were in.
Weren't you in the reading group for also Postone?
Oh, okay. It was the same reading group. I forget which section.
Were you also in the group for reading Reza? It was a group that started with Reza.
Yeah,
and then went to Postone, and then went to Kim. What's his name? Irad Kim. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget which part of that you were.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So after that reading group, I decided I needed to like take more classes and stuff and do more reading. So that's kind of why I'm at the New Center. And yeah, in my personal practice, I'm like a musician, and
well, I got a lot of musicians in my classes also.
Well, yeah, and I want to do more writing also, so that's why I want to take these classes and stuff like that.
Okay, great to have you. Thank you, Mr. Slav.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Mstislav. I used to live in Kiev, Ukraine, but from the recent time I'm residing in Funchal, Madeira in Portugal. I'm PhD in philosophy and used to work as a lecturer in Kiev Polytechnical University. My current magistral, so to say, interests are metaphysics of pessimism and philosophy of time. But also I want to deepen my insights in understanding Brandomian philosophy and all those Wittgenstein concerned projects of contemporary philosophy. I have tried to learn Wittgenstein in Ukrainian, then I have tried to read him in Russian. Now I suppose the time has come to take it seriously and to study him in English. Well, I was more like attentive reader of his Tractatus and works on certainty, but I want to get deeper philosophical.
You read on uncertainty. I think uncertainty is fantastic. I just love uncertainty anyway.
Yes, very interesting.
We will be dealing with the philosophical investigation. I think the philosophical investigation is really important, but I don't really like it as much as Tractatus and uncertainty, actually. But this is a matter of personal taste. Thank you, Mr. Love. Eduardo?
Hi, everyone. I am Eduardo. I'm based in São Paulo, Brazil. I'm currently doing a master's, but I'm trying to think a systematic approach to think means through aesthetics. And I'm also interested in the idea of forms of life, because recently I've been reading Marcuse, and I think everyone will return to Marcuse. There's a wave coming, so be ready to read Marcuse. He's going to become relevant again. And Marcuse and Winter, and to think how aesthetics can be a way to envision new forms of life, or how they can make some norms explicit. And Marcuse especially has an idea of aesthetics as this twin sister of reason, as a mediating force between thought and action. So I'm interested in deepening this idea of aesthetics through a Wittgensteinian approach as well.
Thank you, Eduardo. I have Ankur.
Hello, Zip. Yeah, I'm Ankur. I'm like quite sleepy now. It's quite late in India. I'm from India, Rajasthan. And I did my studies in painting, masters back in 2019. Now I'm working within my own reason. Most of the time, the practice is from the reasonal context, reasonal problems, and most of the time, and like it's really hard to deal with the community when it is not from art nor philosophy, but how to bring alternative logic to them to make understand the things like the place I'm living in. So like that's also like the main motivation to keep reading, knowing philosophy, all of it. And I used to read, but or not in deep. Like in this also, I was up. Not everything was able to um, go deep inside it, and like at the same time they all appear same, like Ludwig Wittgenstein, Deleuze, or Lacan. For me, not maybe for you, they're like saying the same things, and from a very but yeah, it's to grab more and like create alternative logics within the space I live and belong.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ankur.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that would be it. I think, yeah, everybody, Martina, I mean, yeah, she got out already. So, yep. It is like, what's GRS, all the same.
Okay, I think maybe we can pick this up in the classroom or next session.
Yeah,
Maybe
of course.
for the recording we can end now.
Yeah.
But thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you everybody today. Okay, I'm gonna just stop the recording.